The wind had been screaming since sundown. Cole Harding stood at the kitchen window with a cup of coffee going cold in his hand, watching the snow come sideways off the Laramie Range. It was the kind of storm that made a man feel the size of himself. Small, temporary, something the land would outlast without effort. The horses were locked in the barn. The cattle had moved down to the lower pasture 2 days ago when the sky started that particular shade of iron that old ranchers learned to read like a second language. The ranch hands had driven out before noon. By 9 o'clock, there wasn't a living soul on the Double H except Cole and the dogs, and even the dogs had curled themselves into their beds like punctuation marks ending a sentence. Cole hadn't lit the overhead light. He stood in the kitchen by the glow of the range hood, watching the dark, and he thought about nothing in particular, which was the only kind of thinking he'd learned to do well in the years since Margaret had gone. 4 years. The house still had her cast-iron pans on the hooks above the stove, and he'd never moved them. He didn't think about that either. He set the coffee down and turned toward the hallway. That's when the knocking came. Not a knock. A pounding. Both fists, open palm, desperate. The sound of someone throwing everything they had against wood because they had nothing left to throw. Cole went still. He'd been a rancher in Wyoming his whole life. He knew what doors sounded like in a storm. The wind could make them rattle and moan, could make the whole house creak like a ship. This was not the wind. This was a human being. This was someone who needed something immediately. He crossed the living room in 4 strides and pulled the front door open. The cold hit him like a wall. She was standing in it, soaked through, shaking so violently that the motion seemed almost mechanical, her dark hair plastered flat against her face and neck. She was young, maybe 30, and she was holding a child against her chest with both arms wrapped around him, the boy's face buried in her shoulder, his small body limp with either sleep or exhaustion or something worse. She was wearing a coat that was wholly inadequate for this, a thin canvas barn jacket, the kind meant for autumn, not for what the mountains were doing tonight. Her jeans were soaked black to the knee. Her eyes, when they found Cole's face, were extraordinary. Not because they were beautiful, though they were, but because of what was in them. The particular look of a person who has been running for a long time and has just reached the point where the legs can't carry it anymore. "Please," she said. That was all. One word. But it contained a whole story Cole couldn't yet read. He stepped back. "Come in." She didn't move. Her eyes dropped to something, and Cole followed her gaze down, and that's when he saw it. The dark stain on the sleeve of her jacket, just above the wrist. Too dark for water. Too concentrated. He'd seen enough of that color in his life, doctoring livestock and doctoring himself, to recognize it without thinking. "You're hurt," he said. "It's not." She stopped. Her jaw locked. She was fighting something, some internal argument about whether to accept help from a stranger at an isolated ranch in the middle of a blizzard. The fact that she was even having that argument told him something. He looked past her into the dark beyond the porch. The snow was so heavy it turned the night into static. And there, far down the long gravel road that connected the Double H to Route 130, a pair of headlights. Not moving. Just sitting, a half-mile out, the beams barely visible through the white. He looked back at her. She had seen him look. She pulled the boy tighter against her chest. Her lips parted. "They'll kill me," she whispered. "And they'll take my son." Then her knees buckled. Cole caught her before she hit the porch. He carried her inside, her and the boy both, the child still somehow asleep, pressed between them, and he kicked the door shut with his heel and turned the deadbolt with his free hand, a single smooth motion that came from muscle memory, from a ranch life that had required him to do 6 things at once for 40-some years. He laid her on the couch and pried the boy gently free from her grip, which was harder than it should have been. Even unconscious, her arms had locked around him. He wrapped the boy in the wool blanket from the back of the armchair and tucked him against the couch cushions, close enough that she could feel him when she came around. Then he went to the front window, killed the lamp, stood to the side, not in front of the glass, and watched the road. The headlights hadn't moved. For 3 minutes, he watched. His heartbeat was even. His breathing was slow. He was not afraid, exactly. Cole Harding had stopped being afraid of most things after Margaret, after the grief, after the year he'd spent learning what loss actually cost. But he was alert, in the particular way of a man who understands that the world is sometimes genuinely dangerous and there is no use pretending otherwise. The headlights sat. Then, slowly, deliberately, they reversed, backed up to the highway, turned, and disappeared into the snow. Not gone. He knew that. Just gone for now. He went back to the couch. She was coming around. Her eyelids flickered, and she pulled in a breath like a woman surfacing from cold water, and her first movement was toward the boy, her hand finding his back, confirming his presence before she was even fully conscious. "He's right here," Cole said quietly. "He's warm." She opened her eyes and looked at him. For a moment she didn't know where she was, and he watched her figure it out, the ceiling, the fireplace, the lamps, the stranger in front of her. He watched the fear reorganize itself into something she could manage. "The people outside," she started. "They're gone. For now." She closed her eyes again. Not from relief, he thought. From something heavier than relief. From the weight of a situation that wasn't over just because the immediate danger had retreated. He stood up. "I'm going to look at your arm. It's fine." "It's not fine." She looked at him properly then. He was a big man, 6'2", broad through the chest, the kind of build that comes not from a gym but from 40 years of physical work. His face was weathered and even-featured, the kind of face that didn't give much away. He was wearing a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and his eyes, she would think later, were the color of the mountains in early morning, that particular shade of gray-blue that is neither fully one thing nor fully another. He didn't look cruel. He didn't look like any of the men she'd been running from, who had bright eyes and soft hands and spoke in the cadences of lawyers. She nodded once and let him look at her arm. The cut was on the forearm, 6 inches long, shallow but ragged, the kind of wound from broken glass rather than a blade. He cleaned it with supplies from a bathroom cabinet without asking her any questions she'd have to lie through. He taped it with butterfly closures and wrapped it in gauze and tied the gauze with the same practical efficiency he used for everything. Her wrist, he noticed, had a bruise that was 3 days old at least. Yellow-green at the edges. It had not come from tonight. He didn't say anything about it. When he was done, he went to the kitchen and put a pot of soup on the stove. Not from a can, actual soup, from the batch he'd made 2 days ago, the kind with barley and vegetables that thickened as it sat. He heated it until steam rose from it and carried a bowl to her. She looked at it like she'd forgotten that such things existed. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated. "Nora." "Cole," he said. He handed her the bowl. "The boy. Eli." Her voice changed completely when she said it. Softened into something that was almost painful to hear. "He's 4. He doesn't understand." She stopped. Started over. "He thinks we're on an adventure." Cole looked at the child. Eli was small for 4, or maybe he just seemed small curled in that oversized blanket, his face slack with exhausted sleep, one fist pressed to his cheek. He had his mother's dark coloring, her same quality of stillness even at rest. "He can sleep in the guest room," Cole said. "You both can. There's a lock on the door, if that matters to you." It mattered. He could see it in the way her shoulders changed. "I don't." She struggled with something. "I don't know how long we'd need." "Stay until it's safe." He picked up his coffee cup and headed back toward the kitchen. "Nobody gets put out of this house during a storm." He said it like a rule that had always existed. Like it wasn't specifically about her. She understood, somehow, that this was kindness in the shape of practicality, and that he'd done it that way on purpose. She looked down at the soup. Picked up the spoon. Outside, the storm pressed against the house and the windows shook in their frames and the cold tried, as cold always does, to find a way in. It couldn't get in tonight. The storm lasted 3 days. By the second morning, Nora had figured out the layout of the house well enough to make coffee before Cole came downstairs. She wasn't sure why she did it, some instinct toward usefulness, toward earning space, toward the particular anxiety of a woman who has learned that nothing is truly given without a cost attached. But Cole came into the kitchen at 6 a.m. and found the coffee waiting and didn't make a thing of it either way. He poured a cup, looked out the window at the white obliteration of his land, and said, "Roads won't clear until tomorrow at the earliest." "Okay," she said. "There's food." "I know. Thank you." He nodded and took his coffee to his office. She heard the particular sound of a man settling into the chair at a desk, the creak of leather, the sound of papers. He was managing a ranch in a blizzard. She understood enough about working land to know that storms meant work, not rest. Phone calls and insurance filings and checking on animals and doing the mental math of cattle and feed and frozen pipes. Eli woke up at 7 with his hair sticking in 6 directions and came padding downstairs in his socks with the serious face of a child who has processed the previous day's information and arrived at a specific conclusion. "Are we at a cowboy's house?" he asked. "Yes," Nora said. Eli nodded gravely, as though this confirmed something he'd suspected. Then he sat at the kitchen table and ate the scrambled eggs she made him with the concentrated focus of a small person who is very hungry and taking it seriously. Cole appeared in the kitchen doorway around 8 with a piece of fence machinery she didn't recognize, a metal fitting of some kind, cracked through the housing. He set it on the counter and started looking through a drawer for something. Eli watched him from the table. "Is that broken?" Eli asked. Cole looked at it. "Yep. Can you fix it?" "Probably." He found whatever he was looking for in the drawer, a tube of some specific adhesive, and turned back toward the hallway. "I'm good at fixing things," Eli offered. "I fixed my dump truck." Cole paused. He looked at the boy. Something moved across his face that was not quite a smile but was adjacent to one. "What was wrong with it?" "The wheel came off. I put it back." "That's good work." Cole looked at the metal fitting in his hand. "This is a little different. More like an engineering problem." Eli's eyebrows went up. "I like engineering." Nora watched Cole look at her son. She watched him make a decision the way men like him made decisions. Not with fanfare, just with a slight shift of posture. "Come see," Cole said to the boy. Eli slid off the chair immediately. Nora watched them disappear down the hallway toward what she'd already understood was a workshop space at the back of the house. A room of tools and workbenches and the good, particular smell of machine oil and sawdust. She stood at the kitchen sink and listened to the low murmur of Cole's voice explaining something, and Eli's higher voice asking questions, and the sound of it hit her somewhere unexpected. She turned on the faucet so she had something to do with her hands. That afternoon, while Eli slept, she told Cole the basic shape of it. They were sitting at the kitchen table with the remnants of lunch between them. He hadn't asked. She hadn't planned to say anything. But the storm was pressing in, and the silence had weight to it, and she found the words coming out with a kind of tired inevitability, like water finding its level. "My husband died 8 months ago," she said. "Car accident, they said. Single vehicle. He went off the highway on a clear night." Cole didn't say anything. He turned his coffee cup slowly between his palms. "His name was Daniel. He was a good man. I need you to understand that. He was a genuinely good man who got into something over his head. He was an accountant. He did work for a company called Meridian Development, real estate, mostly. Large projects." She paused. "He found out they were using the projects to move money. That's the shorthand. The long version is complicated and involves 3 shell companies in the Caymans and a state senator whose name I will not say in this house with my son sleeping upstairs." Cole's hands went still on the coffee cup. He was trying to figure out what to do about it. "He kept documents. Copies of things. He told me he had them somewhere safe in case anything happened to him." Her voice was level, but it cost her something to keep it that way. 3 weeks after the accident, men came to the house. They said they were with an accounting firm Daniel had worked with. They were very polite. They asked if Daniel had left any work materials at home, files, drives, anything like that. She looked up. They were not accountants. No, Cole agreed. I gave them what I had, because I had nothing to hide and because I was stupid, because I was still in the fog of grief and I didn't understand yet what Daniel had been involved in. She pressed her thumb to the inside of her bandaged wrist, not hard enough to hurt, just to feel it. Then the calls started. Then someone broke into the house while Eli and I were at the grocery store. Then 2 nights ago. She stopped. Cole waited. Someone followed us. When I went to leave town, I started driving. I didn't have a plan. I was going toward my sister's in Colorado, but the storm caught us and the car slid off the road, about a mile from here. We walked. She looked at her arm. There was glass in the door when I got Eli out. He wasn't hurt. What do they want? There are documents Daniel hid that they haven't found. I think there are files, evidence, that could destroy what they've built. They think I know where they are. She met his eyes. I don't. I genuinely don't. But they don't believe that. Cole was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the wind found some gap in the eaves and sang one sustained low note through it. Do you have somewhere to go? Family. Someone who can take you in properly. My sister. Once the road's clear. Does she know you're coming? She doesn't know I'm running. I didn't want to call from. I didn't want to call. He nodded. That made sense to him. Calls could be traced. She was not as naive as she'd been 8 months ago. You'll stay here until the road's clear and I can drive you myself, he said. She looked at him. You don't have to do that. I know. He picked up the plates and carried them to the sink. There's a storm lamp in the hall closet in case the power goes out tonight. There's an extra set of blankets on the shelf in the guest room. The lock on that door, it's a real one. Dead bolt. I had it installed. She blinked. Why do you have a dead bolt on a guest room? He ran water over the plates. Used to be a hired man's quarters. Men who work for you, you don't always know them straight off. Better to let people feel safe while you're getting acquainted. She watched the back of him. That's a thoughtful thing to install. It's a practical thing, he said. Same sometimes. The power did go out that night, at 10:30. She was lying in the dark in the guest room listening to it howl when she heard the soft knock. She went still. It's Cole. Brought you a lamp. Set it outside the door. She heard his footsteps retreat down the hall before she'd even gotten out of bed. When she opened the door, there was the lamp, lit, and beside it, a mug of chamomile tea that she hadn't asked for. She stood in the doorway holding the mug for a long time, listening to the storm and the silence of the house around it, and felt something she hadn't felt in 8 months, hadn't expected to feel tonight, maybe hadn't expected to feel again. Safe. Just that. The bare, simple, animal relief of it. The storm broke on the 3rd morning in the way Wyoming storms sometimes did, not gradually, but all at once, as though someone had lifted a curtain. Nora woke to white light coming through the curtain, and Eli's voice from across the hall announcing that there was a horse looking in the window. She pulled on her jeans and went to look. There was, in fact, a horse looking in the window, a bay mare who had apparently pushed through the paddock fence in search of something more interesting and was now regarding the guest room window with large equine curiosity. Can I touch her? Eli breathed. Ask Cole. Cole, when consulted, said yes, and spent the next hour walking Eli through the basics of approaching a horse. The angle of the body, the flat palm, the patient waiting while the animal decides. Nora stood at the paddock fence in a borrowed coat 3 sizes too big and watched her son stand absolutely still while the mare dropped her nose into his hand, and she felt that particular twist of grief that comes without warning. Daniel would have loved this. Daniel would have taken 17 photographs. She turned away before Cole could see her face. She spent the morning making herself useful, which was the only way she knew to process things. She cleaned the kitchen, not because it was dirty, but because it was the kind of deep clean that a bachelor household accumulates, the overlooked corners, the spice rack no one had reorganized in years. She found a split seam on the curtains in the living room and mended it with a needle and thread from the sewing tin in the hall closet. She wasn't sure he'd even notice. He noticed. He came in from checking the barn at noon, stomped the snow off his boots at the door, and glanced at the curtain. Said nothing. But later, when she was washing the mending thread from her hands at the kitchen sink, he set a cup of coffee down beside her without being asked. Small. It was all small. But small things, she was learning, were his language. That afternoon, while Eli napped, Cole took her to see the horses properly. There were 11 of them. The working quarter horses and 3 older ones he kept for reasons that weren't economic. He knew every horse by name and history the way some men knew scripture. Not performed knowledge, but real knowing, the kind that lives in the hands and the movement of the body. He showed her the older ones first. Told her their names in the same minimal way he spoke about everything. This is Duke. 22. Used to rope calves in 3 seconds flat. Now he mostly supervises. Duke regarded her with immense dignity. This is Penny. She was my wife's. A pause. Nora looked at the mare, dark chestnut, a white stripe down the nose, old now but clearly still watchful. I didn't know you'd been married, Nora said. 4 years ago. Cancer. He said it simply, the way you say a fact you've said enough times that it's lost its power to tear you open in public. She loved horses more than she loved most people. Penny was hers from a filly. You kept her. Couldn't do anything else. He moved to the next stall. I'm not sentimental about most things. I'm sentimental about that horse. Make of it what you will. Nora made of it quite a lot, but didn't say so. She asked him, later, while he was checking hooves and she was handing him tools she'd been taught to identify, how long he'd had the ranch. Born on it, he said. 3rd generation. My grandfather built the original house. My father doubled the acreage. I doubled it again. He straightened up, moved to the next horse. It was supposed to go to children after me. But that's not how it went. I'm sorry. He looked at her over the horse's back. I'm not asking for sympathy. Just answering the question. I know, she said. I'm offering it anyway. He was quiet for a moment. Margaret wanted 4 kids. She had names picked. Not in a dreamy way, in a practical way like they were already real. She'd introduce them sometimes in conversation. Eleanor would be stubborn, I can tell already. Thomas would want to be outdoors every minute. His voice had not changed in pitch or pace. But something behind his eyes had shifted. You meet a person who does that, you start to half believe those children already exist somewhere. Nora set down the tool she was holding. That's a beautiful thing to carry. It's heavy sometimes. He resumed his work. But yes, it's a beautiful thing. The roads were cleared to the highway by the second day of clear weather, but Cole didn't mention driving her to Colorado and she didn't push it. Something wordless had extended the arrangement, the way these things do sometimes, not through negotiation or declaration but through the simple accumulation of shared days. Eli had claimed the house with the efficiency of a 4-year-old. His drawings appeared on the refrigerator, his boots accumulated by the door, his questions became part of the daily soundtrack of the place. Do horses dream? Why is the sky a different blue in Wyoming than home? What's your dog's name? The dog was a border collie named Hatch, who had accepted Eli the way sensible border collies accept children, as small chaotic objects that must be gently herded and protected. Eli had taken to following Hatch through the house, and Hatch had taken to following Cole, which meant that Cole was regularly trailed by a small dog and a smaller boy, and he bore this with the particular forbearance of a man who is being offered something he has no vocabulary for yet. One evening, Nora looked up from the book she was reading to find Cole on the living room floor with Eli. She hadn't heard them move there. They were looking at something, a hand-drawn map of the ranch that Cole had apparently sketched on the back of an envelope, showing where different things were. The barn, the paddocks, the creek, the high pasture. Eli was making Cole add more things. Put the horse that looked at my window. Cole put a small horse by the paddock. Put Hatch. Cole drew a dog shape that was geometrically questionable but recognizable. Put me. Cole drew a small figure by the paddock, then, after a pause, drew another figure beside it. That's me, Eli said, pointing. Who's that? That's you and your mom, Cole said. Eli studied the map. Where are you? Another pause. Cole drew a third figure near the barn. Eli took the envelope and put it in the pocket of his flannel pajamas with the gravity of someone archiving something important. Nora looked back at her book. She read the same sentence 5 times and could not have told anyone what it said. The threatening call came on a Tuesday, 2 weeks after the storm. She was in the kitchen washing vegetables when Cole's phone rang. The house phone, the number she'd given her sister as a contact because she'd left her own cell in the car that was still in a ditch a mile down the road. She'd thought only her sister had this number. Cole answered it in the hallway and said 3 words before she heard his voice change. Not louder, not harder, just a very particular stillness that she recognized, because she'd heard that quality of voice before. He came to the kitchen doorway. Call for you, he said. It's not your sister. She wiped her hands on the dish towel. Walked to the phone. The man on the other end had a voice she recognized. Smooth, educated, the tone of a man accustomed to being reasonable in the opening of a conversation and being something else in the close of it. Mrs. Callahan, he said. You've been a challenging person to locate. She said nothing. I think we both know this has gone on longer than it needs to. You have something that belongs to us, or you know where it is. Either way, we'd like to conclude this quickly and quietly. For everyone's benefit. Including your boy. The last 2 words were the message. The rest was preamble. I don't know what you're looking for, she said. Mrs. Callahan. I told you that before. When your people came to the house. I don't know. Daniel didn't tell me. Her voice was steadier than she expected it to be. He was protecting me. He wasn't protecting you very well. A pause that was designed to land like a threat. Think about where you are. An isolated ranch in Wyoming. Winter. We've been patient. Our patience has a limit. So does mine, she said. Goodbye. She hung up the phone. She stood with her hand on the receiver for a moment. Then she turned around. Cole was standing in the doorway, not pretending he hadn't heard. They tracked the house phone, she said. That's federal territory, he said. Wiretapping. They don't care. I know. He moved past her to the kitchen window and looked out toward the road. I'm going to call a man I know. Sheriff's deputy in town. Not the sheriff, the deputy. He's trustworthy. He knows a federal contact. She shook her head. If you bring law enforcement in. If I don't, we're sitting here waiting for something worse. He turned to look at her. Nora. What you've told me, what you have, this isn't just your problem anymore. That makes it mine to help with. Let me help. She looked at him. This man she'd known for 2 weeks. This man who had opened a door in a storm and carried her inside and left tea outside her door and drawn a map with himself near the barn. What if it makes things harder for you? She asked. These people have money. They have lawyers. So do I. It was said without bravado. Just a fact, offered plainly. She exhaled. Okay. 3 days later, there was a black truck parked at the gate. Cole saw it in the morning when he went out to check the cattle. It was parked on the public road, outside his property line, which was deliberate, just far enough to be legal. A message, not an action. We are still here. We are watching. He did not accelerate his pace. He finished checking the cattle. He came back to the house and told Nora what he'd seen in the same tone he used to say anything. She went very still. I've spoken to Pete, Cole said. Pete was the deputy, a lean, quiet man who had come out 2 days ago and listened to Nora for 2 hours without interrupting. He says move fast. The federal contact is interested. There may be a way to use what you have, or what Daniel had, to bring them in rather than just defend against them. I've been trying to remember, Nora said. Everything Daniel said in the last months. He used to say he was keeping things safe. He said once. She frowned. He said he'd put things with someone who would know what to do with them if something happened. Someone from before. Before what? Before I knew him. He was in the army. There was a man he served with. I met him once at a reunion, years ago. Robert something. He was in intelligence. She looked up. I think that's who he meant. You have contact information? I think it might be in his email. He had an old address I never used. If I can access it. Cole put his laptop on the table without being asked. She found it. It took 3 hours of trying to remember passwords and using the account recovery options that Daniel had set up years ago, but she found it. A draft email, never sent, addressed to a Robert Galloway at a Gmail address that was probably a dead drop. The draft contained no message. Only an attachment, a compressed file, password protected. She knew the password before she tried it. Their wedding date. Daniel, you careful, loving, impossible man. The files inside were meticulous. Spreadsheets. Copies of wire transfers. Emails between executives at Meridian Development and a state senator named Harlan Bauer. Invoices for construction contracts on public land that had been steered through without competitive bidding. A paper trail through 4 years of a scheme that had moved somewhere north of $40 million. Nora sat back in her chair. Cole stood behind her, reading the screen. This is enough, he said. More than enough. She covered her mouth with her hand. Then, he did do something. He didn't just die. He was building this. He knew something was going to happen, and he built a case first. Cole put his hand on her shoulder. Just that. Just the weight of it. She pressed her hand over his, and they stayed that way while the information on the screen rearranged the shape of the past 8 months into something that looked different than it had an hour ago. It happened 4 days later, in the hour before dawn. Nora had not been sleeping deeply since the phone call. She lay with her ears tuned to the house the way she'd learned to sleep since the first men came to her door 8 months ago, alert just below consciousness, the way a mother sleeps with a newborn. She heard a door. Not the front door. The back, the one off the mudroom that Cole always checked and locked before bed. It was a sound that was almost nothing, the subtle catch of a latch, the soft complaint of hinges in cold air. She was out of bed in 3 seconds. Eli. He wasn't in his bed. She went cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. The mudroom. She ran. The back door was open. Not broken. Cole's key ring was missing from its hook. And Eli's boots were gone from beside the door, and there was one small set of footprints going out into the blue pre-dawn snow. She went through the door without her coat. Cole was already there. He was standing in the yard in his barn clothes, holding Eli in his arms, and Eli was asleep. He had gone outside in his boots and his pajamas because he'd heard something in the barn, he would later explain, a hoarse sound that worried him, and he'd taken Cole's keys off the hook because he remembered which one unlocked the barn, and he'd gone to check. He'd been in the barn for 4 minutes before Cole, who had also heard the sound, came down to find him. He was perfectly fine. He was curled against Cole's chest, asleep again, one hand wrapped in the collar of Cole's flannel shirt, the way a child holds onto the person carrying him even when he doesn't know he's doing it. But Nora didn't know any of that yet. She came through the back door and saw her son in another man's arms, and her legs stopped working. Cole said, "He's fine." He heard the mare and went to check. "He's fine, Nora." She walked through the snow in her socks. She pressed both hands against Eli's back and his head and verified him. Breathing, warm, whole, fine, and then something in her structural integrity gave way. She bent forward over her son and Cole, and she made a sound she had not made since the night she identified Daniel's body, a sound that wasn't crying so much as the physical release of 8 months of relentless pressure. Cole held them both. His arm came around her, the other one still holding Eli, and he held them in the dark and the cold and the blue pre-dawn, and he didn't say anything because there was nothing to say, and he'd never been a man who filled silences with words that didn't earn their place. She cried until she was empty. When she pulled back, she couldn't look at him. She took Eli from his arms and held the boy against her chest and looked at the snow. "I ruin everything," she said. "Everyone who's near me. Don't. It's true. Daniel is dead. I brought this to your house. Those people outside." "Stop." He said it quietly, but there was weight behind it. She stopped. He waited a beat. "You didn't ruin Daniel. What happened to Daniel was done by men who chose to do it. You didn't bring anything to my house that I didn't open the door for. And those people outside can't get at what matters here because we've already sent it to 3 federal agencies and they know we have copies." He looked at her steadily in the cold pre-dawn. "You've been carrying this alone for 8 months. That's done now." She looked at him then. Really looked. "Why do you care?" she said. It came out less harsh than it might have. It was a genuine question, spoken from exhaustion. "I'm a stranger. I showed up at your door in a storm." He was quiet for a long moment. "My wife used to say that the right people show up when the house is ready for them." He looked away toward the dark mountain line on the horizon. "I used to think that was her being poetic. I'm not as sure about it as I used to be." Nora held her sleeping son and looked at this man in the blue dark and felt the specific weight of being truly seen by someone, maybe for the first time in years. "Go inside," he said. "Get warm. I'll check the mare." She went inside. The federal agents came on a Thursday, which seemed like an ordinary day for the world to change. 2 of them, both with the particular nondescript quality of federal agents. Not in suits, but in good outdoor clothing, driving an unmarked SUV. Pete the deputy had driven out with them. They were with Nora for 3 hours in Cole's living room, going through the files she'd sent and the copies she'd made and the timeline she'd written out by hand over the previous 2 nights. Cole stayed in his office. Not because he was indifferent but because she needed to do this herself, and he knew the difference between support and intrusion. When they left, she came to find him. She stood in the doorway of his office, a room that smelled of old paper and leather and the particular dryness of a space that contained decades of land records and ranch business, and she said, "They think they can bring charges within 60 days. They said we should lie low. They're putting someone on the road." Cole nodded. "Harlan Bauer is apparently already talking." She said it with the flat quality of someone still processing information. "It turns out he's been wanting a way out for 2 years. The federal contact, Robert Galloway, turns out he'd been building the same case from another direction. He knew Daniel. He's the one who first got Daniel to look at the accounts." A pause. Daniel didn't stumble into it. He was asked to look. By someone who trusted him. Cole absorbed this. "Daniel chose it," she said. "He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew the risk, and he chose to document it anyway." Her voice was steady, though her eyes were bright. "He did something that matters." "Yes," Cole said. "I wanted him to just have been in an accident. A terrible random accident, because at least that wouldn't mean anyone chose it." She pressed her lips together. "But he chose to do something good, and it cost him everything, and I have to. I'm trying to figure out how to hold both of those things." Cole set down his pen. "You hold them the same way you hold anything heavy. You don't let go, but you learn to carry it differently. Takes time." She looked at him. "You've learned to carry things differently." "Still learning," he said. "But yes." The next weeks had a different quality to them. The tension didn't disappear. There was still a federal process in motion, still a black truck that occasionally appeared on the road and then disappeared, but it had been handed to forces larger than her ability to manage alone, and something in her unclenched that had been clenched since August. She learned the ranch. Not by being taught, but by watching and asking and inserting herself into the work wherever she could. She was better with horses than she'd let on. She'd grown up around them, had been away from them for a decade of city living. The horses recognized her competence and responded to it, which pleased her in a way that ran surprisingly deep. Cole watched her work with the bay mare one afternoon from the fence, watched her hands, the angle of her body, the patience she showed. Then he went back to what he was doing without comment. But the following morning there was a pair of good riding gloves on the bench by the mudroom door. She put them on without saying anything and went out to the barn. They rode together sometimes in the late afternoon when the light on the snow had gone gold and the mountains turned that particular rose amber that only happened in winter. She rode well and he rode the way he did everything, without waste, without show. The horses moved between the fences and out toward the high pasture and they were mostly quiet together, which was fine, because the landscape didn't require talking. Eli learned to feed carrots to Duke by hand, with such gravity and ceremony that the old horse appeared to regard it as a religious observance. He also learned, through a process Nora didn't entirely observe, to say "whoa" in the correct tone of voice, and began applying this word to Hatch the border collie with mixed results. One evening, sitting at the dinner table with the three of them over a pot of beef stew that Cole had made while Nora helped Eli with something that passed for homework, Eli looked up at Cole and said, without context or preamble, "Papa Cole." The table went silent. Eli, unaware of what he'd done, went back to his drawing. He'd been calling Cole Mr. Cole, which he'd started the second day and which Cole had never corrected. The shift had apparently happened somewhere in Eli's internal lexicon without announcement. Nora didn't look at Cole. She looked at her bowl. Cole put his fork down very carefully. "Eli," Nora said quietly. "Cole's name is—" "It's all right," Cole said. She looked at him then. His face was doing something complicated, not a performance, not a mask, but the genuine visible effort of a man holding something he wasn't sure where to put. "It's all right," he said again to her. Eli had moved on. He was asking Hatch to look at his drawing. Hatch was obliging with a level of enthusiasm that was suspicious. But for a moment, at the table in the warm kitchen with the stew going cold in their bowls and the fire in the next room and the dark mountains outside, Cole and Nora looked at each other across something that had no name yet but was very clearly there. The arrest came on a Wednesday morning with no warning, which is how arrests usually come when they are being done correctly. Nora learned about it from Pete, who called the house phone at 7 a.m. to say that Harlan Bauer had been arrested at his home in Cheyenne and that 3 Meridian Development executives had been arrested simultaneously across 2 states and that the man who had called her, whose name turned out to be Leonard Coates, general counsel for Meridian Development, was in federal custody. A 4th executive had apparently been in the process of leaving the country via private plane and was intercepted at Jackson Hole Airport. She sat down on the kitchen floor. Not because she couldn't stand. She just sat down because the floor was there and it seemed like the right altitude for this information. Cole came in from the mudroom and found her sitting on the floor against the cabinet, the phone in her lap. He crouched down in front of her without saying anything. "It's over," she said. He looked at her face. "Not completely, there'll be trials. They'll want my testimony. It'll be months. But—" She put the phone down. "The people who killed Daniel, who chased us, it's over. They can't come here anymore." He nodded. "I can go back," she said. The silence that followed had a different texture than the silences between them usually had. It was loaded in a way that both of them could feel, and neither of them moved to address yet. "When you're ready," he said. "Eli loves it here," she said. "Not as an argument. Just as a fact. I know. He asked me yesterday if we could have a horse when we go home." She looked at Cole. "He meant bring one from here. He hasn't asked which one, but I have a suspicion." Cole almost smiled. Duke would have opinions about that. He'd adjust. She looked at her hands. "I don't know what home is anymore. Our house, the one Daniel and I had, I can't go back to it. I know that. My sister has a place, and she wants us, and it would be good for Eli to have family close, and I believe all of that." A pause. "I also don't know how to be somewhere that isn't here." Cole sat down on the floor beside her, his back against the cabinet. Two adults sitting on a kitchen floor, which was exactly as undignified and honest as it sounds. "I have a proposal," he said. She waited. "Stay through spring. Help me figure out what to do with the east pasture, which has been a problem I can't solve because I don't have enough people. Your sister can come visit. The testimony, the legal process, it'll need a base of operations anyway, and this is central." He paused. "And then you decide. About all of it. In the spring. When there's not a blizzard and a federal case and 8 months of fear affecting your judgment." She looked at him sideways. "That's very practical. I'm a practical person." "You're not entirely practical," she said. "You kept your wife's horse." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You noticed that." "I notice most things." Another silence. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, Eli could be heard in the yard talking to Hatch about something. "Spring," she said. "Spring," he agreed. Neither of them moved for a while. They sat on the kitchen floor while the morning light came through the east window and fell across the worn tile in long warm bars, and outside her son's voice rose and fell with the cheerful authority of a 4-year-old who has no doubt that the people who love him are exactly where they're supposed to be. The thaw came in mid-March. It came the way it always did in Wyoming, not gradually, but in sudden proclamations, as though the land had been holding its breath all winter and finally let it go. The creek that ran through the back of the Double H unfroze in 3 days and was running swift and brown and cold. The snow pulled back from the south-facing slopes first, revealing dead grass that would green within a week. The horses grew restless and had to be let out, and they moved through the lower pasture with the exuberance of animals reclaiming space. Eli had turned 5 in February. Cole had built him a wooden horse, not a toy horse exactly, but a carved figure about 18 inches high, detailed and accurate, with a dark coat painted on it that closely resembled the bay mare who had looked through the window on the second morning of the storm. Eli had named it after the real mare, June, and it lived on his bedside table. He told it good night every evening. Nora had watched Cole carve it over 3 weeks of winter evenings, in the workshop, when he thought she wasn't watching. She watched through the window sometimes, the bent head, the careful hands, the patient work of a man making something because a child should have it. She had stopped trying to be theoretical about what she felt. On a Thursday in late March, while Eli was at the neighbor's ranch, the Hendersons, a family with 3 grandchildren around Eli's age who had adopted them both with a particular warmth of people who understood what a long winter needed, Nora went to find Cole in the barn. He was working with the 3-year-old quarter horse he'd been starting over the winter, and he paused when she came in, reading something in her face before she spoke. She stood in the barn doorway with the March light behind her and said, "I don't want to go to my sister's." He held the lead rope loosely in both hands. He waited. "I want to stay. If." She put a hand on the doorframe. "I want to stay here. Not because I have nowhere else to go, and not because I'm afraid of what's outside this ranch. Because I want to be here." She met his eyes. "Because of you." The 3-year-old shifted. Cole gentled it with one hand without looking away from her. "You should know," he said, "that this isn't a temporary arrangement to me. It hasn't been for a while." She exhaled. "When?" He considered. "The night of the storm. When I opened the door." He paused. "Not in the way you're thinking. Not attraction, not yet. It was something else. It was the feeling of a door that had been closed for 4 years opening, and not knowing yet what that meant, but knowing it meant something." She stepped into the barn. The horse watched her with great calmness. "I'm not easy," she said. "I have a son and a legal process that will take 1.5 years and a grief I'm still working through." "I know. I want you to know it clearly. Not as a warning. As information." "I know," he said again. "I've got grief of my own I'm still working through. And a ranch that makes relationships complicated. And a temperament that is not, by most accounts, easy to be close to." He moved toward her slowly, the way you move toward something you don't want to startle. "We'd be 2 people with heavy things trying to build something. That's not simple." "No," she agreed. "But nothing worth having is simple," he said. "In my experience." She was close enough now to see the texture of his flannel shirt, the particular lines of his face in the barn light. He raised his hand and touched her jaw with the back of his fingers, a single, careful motion. "I want you here," he said. "Not as a temporary thing. As the real thing. If you'll have it." She turned her face into his hand. "I'll have it," she said. Late April. The mountains had turned green on their lower flanks. The creek was running full and the horses were in the upper pasture, Duke standing in the middle of the group with his usual authority, and June, the real June, the bay mare, grazing near the fence. Cole was on the porch in the early evening, the last light on the mountains making them that color, that rose and amber, that Nora had come to think of as the ranch's particular shade of beautiful. She came out with 2 cups of coffee and sat beside him in the other chair. Eli was inside with Hatch, engaged in some project that involved crayons and a significant amount of floor space. His voice came through the screen door at intervals, narrating something to the dog. "He told me today that he wants to be a cowboy," Nora said. "Good profession. He also wants to be a veterinarian and a construction engineer. Ambitious. He gets it from his father." She paused. "The ambition. And something else." Cole looked at her. "Daniel would have liked you," she said. It came out evenly, which it wouldn't have 6 months ago. "I've thought about that a lot. He liked honest people. People who did what they said." She looked at the mountains. "He would have been grateful." "I hope I'd have liked him," Cole said. "You would have." She was certain of this. "He was quiet like you, comfortable with silences." She smiled faintly. "Though he talked more. That would be an improvement." She laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that comes before you can decide whether to have it, which is the best kind. Cole watched her, and his face did the thing it sometimes did when she laughed, went softer in a way he probably didn't know was visible. From inside the house, Eli's voice rose into something decisive, and Hatch made a sound of moderate protest. "Papa Cole," Eli called. Cole was on his feet before the second word landed. Screen door open, inside, the particular ease of a man who has been answering to that name long enough that it lives in his muscles now. Nora sat alone on the porch for a moment in the last light. She thought about the night she had stood in the dark in the snow, exhausted past the point of strategy, with her son against her chest and her arm cut open and headlights in the distance and one lit window in the dark. She thought about the door opening. She thought about a man standing in the light of his own house, looking at her the way people look at things they don't yet know what to do with but know they won't turn away. She had been running toward nothing. Just running because running was the only option. And the storm had deposited her on the steps of something she hadn't known to look for. The screen door opened and Cole came back out with Eli on his back, the boy's legs wrapped around his waist, announcing loudly that Hatch had knocked over the crayon box and that someone needed to be held accountable. "That's what you get for giving the dog engineering responsibilities," Cole said. "I didn't." Eli protested. "He volunteered." Nora looked at them. The man and the boy on the lit porch, against the dark mountains and the last rose of the sky, the particular warmth of a house behind them, lit windows, a fire burning, the smell of the evening meal coming through the door. Found, she thought. That was the only word for it. Not saved. Not rescued. Not given shelter. Found. Cole looked back at her, over Eli's head, across the length of the porch, and she could see in his eyes the echo of the same thought, that here was something neither of them had been looking for, which was maybe the only way it could have arrived. "Come inside," he said. "It's getting cold." She stood up and went inside. The door closed behind her. Outside, the mountains held their dark and the stars came out one by one over Wyoming, and the ranch sat in its hollow between the ridgelines, its lights burning against the dark, the horses standing quiet in the pasture, everything exactly where it was supposed to be.